Afternoon. Welcome to the first day of December and the Public Service Board meeting. I'm not sure where this year has gone, but a warm welcome to you all. And we'll go to the first item, which is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Rob Stewart, from Martin Nichols, Chief Exec, Swansea Council, Sean Harrop-Griffiths, Karen Stapleton, Nuria Zole, Maggie Berry from the Health Board, Chris Jones, Welsh Government, and Amanda Carr from SCVS.
Thank you, Alison. So that takes us on then to item 2, disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest. Relating to the items on the agenda, I can't see anyone indicating. So we'll move on to item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Everyone happy that they are an accurate record of events? Okay, can't see anybody indicating, so we'll take them as read. And so we'll move on then to public question time. Over to you, Alison.
Chair, we've had no public questions submitted. Thank you.
Thank you. So we go on then to items for discussion, decision or approval, and that takes us to item 5, early years maturity maternity matrix, which is a verbal report, and a warm welcome to Gary Mahoney, and I'll pass over to you, Gary.
Hi there. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yes. Just to introduce myself. My name is Gary Mahoney. I'm the Early Years Coordinator for Pathfinder. So just a very brief kind of context what Pathfinder is. Pathfinder is the Early Years Integration Transformation Program that we signed up to back in sort of 2017, 2018, after the first wellbeing assessment where we identified early years as a priority, linking in with our kind of early years strategy. So working with Welsh Government identified, all local authorities identified early years as a priority and brought us together to look at how we can examine the early years system that that's in place or not in place, and how we can look to examine that system through the lens of integration, which fits with the Future Generations Act and the 5 ways of working really nicely. So that's my role. My role wouldn't be here without the PSB's commitment to early years, if that makes sense, of course, for which I'm eternally grateful. So part of this work that we've been undertaking over the past sort of 2 to 3 years, working with different with our partners in health, partners in the local health within the local authority and third sector, but also with Neath Talbot Public Service Board and the way that we're interacting with Neath Talbot local authority to examine our early years services, right through from conception to 7 years old. Part of this work has, on a national level, has been working with the Early Intervention Foundation. The Early Intervention Foundation has developed a toolkit, which is the Early Years Maternity Maturity Matrix. Now, this toolkit has been developed to support local areas to take a systems-wide approach to improving outcomes for children and families. It's a self-assessment tool that professionals and we would engage with members of the public as well on this, to support local partners to help us understand the position of early childhood intervention and identify areas for improvement, especially through the lens of integration, and how we can work better together to deliver positive changes to the well-being, and the outcomes for our families that live within Swansea and Neath Talbot. So I'm here today really just very, very briefly to kind of outline what we've done around this work and also to highlight our ask for the PSB. So we've undertaken workshops with partners from the health board, so midwifery, health visiting, speech therapy, speech language therapy assistants, occupational therapy, key workers, Flying Start, childcare, family support, all the agencies that you would expect to interact with families to help improve their outcomes, link into our original, well-being driver diagrams that we were part of the last well-being objective. We have developed an initial report from that work, which is at a stage which we'd be happy to share with the PSB for people to have sight of, and we have engaged with the Early Intervention Foundation on how we can progress this work and link into the national work. And one of the key, aspects of the national kind of driver that we were getting from Welsh Government and from the Early Intervention Foundation is how important it is for us to gain a key strategic senior sponsorship from our public service board to drive the work forward within the different agencies. So essentially, you know, within our highlight reports that we've been putting forward to the PSB, we've been identifying this, and as a result of that, I've been kindly invited here today to raise this issue. So essentially, that's what I'm here to do today, is to kind of further progress the work of the maturity matrix, and so that highlight how we can then use that as a toolkit as public services to understand how we can better work together to support the families. Like I said, we've already got the report that can be shared after this meeting, and happy to do so, and happy to have further discussions as needed with key partners and key agencies around that, and really to ask the PSB, you know, how we can identify a strategic sponsor to drive this forward. And then from that, we would look to develop further engagement with citizens, but also with agencies as well, to continue understanding how the integration process could, you know, help support the families across Swansea in a better way. And that's essentially why I was here, I suppose. So just, it's very, very brief, and I do appreciate very much your time, because I appreciate how busy you all are. So I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Gary. And I'm sure that public service board partners will welcome the sharing of that report. But in advance of that, today, does anybody have any questions for Gary? I can't see anyone indicating, but I would imagine that the report will spark some questions, I'm sure. And following that report, it's probably useful if we invite you back, Gary, to a future meeting. So welcome that, and I'm sure that as a board we can help identify those senior leaders in each organisation for you. So thank you very much for your report today. Look forward to seeing you at a future meeting. So that takes us on then to item 6, which is local wellbeing plan update and Officer of Future Generation Commissioner's advice. And that takes us to Susie, who's taken this item. Thank you, Susie.
There we go. Lovely. Okay, so to update you on the local wellbeing plan at the moment, the planning group's been very active, completing a draft local wellbeing plan, acting on advice from several sessions with the Office of Future Generations Commissioner. That plan still has significant areas to develop, but it's on track, and that will benefit from the public consultation process significantly. We've just completed a summary of the assessment of local wellbeing. That's been produced to ensure that the public has got a more accessible overview of the plan. We became aware that it was quite a sprawling document, and because it's very important in informing the development of the plan, we felt that it was important to do that extra piece of work, so that citizens can... Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. It's in my bag. Sorry about that. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Let's get rid of this. Sorry. Mortified. Sorry about that. Right. Yeah, so the consultation survey went live on the 22nd of November, and that'll run until just before February 14th. Resources to support and encourage input from groups, as well as a diversity of individuals, that's also been published. So we've got resources PowerPoint for group engagement, an ideas generation template, a plain text version to improve accessibility, all those sorts of things online. We've also been working with Wescombe Morgan Your Voice Advocacy to agree how they can help us to ensure that people with learning difficulties can feed into that process, and overall how accessibility is improved. The communications strategy is to use our networks and connections of our existing PSB partner members to promote the plan through our individual organisational mechanisms. In terms of PR, we've produced with Swansea Council's PR department a press release that's been sent to the PR contacts of all the PSB partners, and so far that's actually resulted in a third of a page article on Saturday night, which was great to see. So that's quite positive in spreading awareness of the consultation and the plan itself. We've also posted social media through Facebook and Twitter, and again, that'll be passed on for sharing. We've done a couple of events already with specific groups. A recent one that was very effective was an interactive stall at World Children's Day, and that actually generated about 70 drawings and written ideas from children looking at how they felt well-being could be improved in Swansea by organisations working together. So that was great to see. And Councillor Lewis and myself took the draft plan to Community and Town Council Forum last night to make sure that we've got the input of the community and town councils who have been quite involved actually since the start through Partnership Forum and Three Horizons planning workshops that we held. And finally, we've got some drop-in scheduled for a rural and an urban library, as well as in Swansea Museum, to encourage and to be able to answer questions from the public. So that's the update on the plan itself. Does anyone have any questions or queries around where we're at the moment? Before I go on to advice from the Office of Future Generations Commissioner.
Thank you, Susie. Anyone with any questions for Susie? No, it just remains me to thank you and partners for spreading the word and trying to get as much engagement as we can in the plan. So thank you for that. So on to part 2, if you like, Susie.
Okay, that's fantastic. So the advice that we've received, you'll see the letter in the pack there. It's very positive. We've worked very closely with their team, and some of the actions have been implemented prior to receiving the advice. The planning group briefly discussed the advice yesterday, and we've put together a table of issues and potential responses, which is being developed in the next week or so as well. We've got a similar advice session coming up with Welsh Government too, and we'll be looking to integrate their forthcoming advice during the consultation process as well. I'm actually just going to highlight some issues in the letter which you might want to give a steer on. I'm just wondering if it might be best to highlight that or just go through. Let's see. I'll just try and I'm just wondering if I can share the agenda that I've got open, because I let's see. Yeah, is that being shared? Should be the agenda.
It is. Is it possible to make it larger if possible, Susie?
Absolutely. Whoops. Whoop, wrong one. Whoop, let's see. Larger. Right, are we better?
That's great, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. So if I just highlighted the areas of interest. Sorry, I thought that was the first one. Okay, so it's basically recommending that we make reference to existing strategies. I'll just find that a second. There we go. That we make reference to existing strategies from all PSB members, which support the general achievement of our objectives, not just the specific steps and activities in the plan itself, to show that, you know, our existing objectives are continuing to be met and how we're being supported by that wider cross-organisational effort. So that's something that we'll be looking to work with probably objective leads to identify. The Commissioner's Office also recommended that we look at some additional steps. This is something that the Joint Committee might want to consider. At the moment, we have 8 steps, 5 of which are linked to the objectives quite directly, and 3 of which are more cross-cutting. They've also suggested that we add to that existing 8 steps, one potentially on the circular economy, how PSB partners can reduce consumption, increase reuse, recycling rates, reduce waste going to landfill, and again, considering how each of the goals could identify opportunities, how this could contribute to cohesive communities via repair cafes, etc. That's something which you may wish to consider. There is similar work going on already, certainly primarily, I guess, through Swansea Council. And I think there were plans for similar activities to be taken forward through the net zero step. But that's something which you might wish to have as a standalone objective, or we could keep them very, very tight and down to a smaller number. They've also suggested that we have a step on habitat and species protection. They're effectively suggesting at another stage in the document as well that we consider having separate steps for climate change and nature recovery effectively. At the moment, we have our net zero sort of ambitions take into account nature recovery and biodiversity as part of that. They're suggesting that we might want to split those up. It's a positive suggestion because it does enable us to really drill down on those areas. But I guess it's got the downside that certainly Welsh Government policy doesn't split the two. I believe council policy is similar. It looks as the two as inextricably linked and intertwined. So that's something you may wish to think about. They've also suggested that we look at how collaborative ways of working, specifically through procurement, can be leveraged to improve carbon emissions in the circular economy, linking in there to the foundational economy. And again, that's something which I think was being addressed via that climate change step indirectly, and could be looked at as part of the action plans, or you could add an additional specific bespoke step looking at that issue in particular. I guess the thing to bear in mind is that if we go for a larger number of steps, because of the integrated nature of the steps and the fact that we're asking each group to look at a small number of steps, if we include those, then we've then got additional steps for every group to look at, so it potentially gets unwieldy. The benefits are that, you know, it does enable us to shine a light on those areas and allocate specific resource, assuming that that's available to those areas. Let's see. There's another area which they've raised, which is likely to be of interest. That's looking at issues around co-production and involvement, particularly in relation to the data development and performance framework steps, which we've included. They're fantastic ideas, and those actions and steps are certainly things which we would be doing. I think they're looking here at more specific resource intensive methodologies, which are fantastic, but it may be worth linking that to the availability of future resource. That's just potentially something to bear in mind, because it's quite a resource intensive activity, although obviously we'd want to do that in as far as we possibly can. And it also references us then back to the co-production network for Wales, to engage with them to look at how, for example, we could establish citizen groups to shape and design PSB services. Again, I'd imagine that there would be some resource implications behind there which would need to be considered if it were worked up into a full standalone step. Yeah, I think that's just about it. There's, I think, under, let's see, collaboration, they've suggested, oh, sorry, I skipped that one. Under collaboration, they've suggested we consider co-locating staff, breaking down traditional structures, arranging job shops, swaps, secondments. I think they're things which we already look at and will continue to look at. Whether they can be specifically referenced in the plan or not, given that they're perhaps not things that we're able to specifically plan ahead. Again, that's something to think about. And finally, they've highlighted the prevention definition that's been developed with Welsh Government and the Future Generations Commissioner. That is intended to help us in our work to provide context and to focus our thinking on prevention as we develop the wellbeing plan going forward. So this is something which I wanted to raise for your attention, the primary, secondary and tertiary plus acute spending division of prevention spend and activity going forward, just so we've got that context that we work within. So that's the advice that we've received from the Future Generations Commissioner. I guess the questions for you would be if you wish to act specifically on each of those suggestions or take them as a whole to inform the plan, and if you're looking for a tight number of steps which, when they're unpacked through the action plans, perhaps address some concerns, or whether maybe during the consultation process we review some of the actions and perhaps rationalise others instead. So those are the sort of things to think about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susie. I'm going to open it up to the floor. Has anyone got any comments or observations or amendments incorporating the comments that we've received in the letter? I can't see anyone indicating. I mean, personally, from my point, sorry, who's that? Martin. I thought you would come in, Martin. It might be on the same subject as I was going to raise, but over to you.
Yeah, you go first. You go first.
But I was going to say that actually, I think all the things which have been highlighted in, the recommendations, if you like, in terms of climate and nature recovery, I assumed we would be addressing all of those things which have been raised in that subgroup anyway. So I'm a little bit anxious or nervous about creating too many work streams, because we need to be mindful of people's time, and I don't feel that we won't give any less gravity to those items just because they're all in the same subgroup in terms of climate change and nature recovery together, because there is, as we know, I chair the council's climate and nature recovery steering group, and there's a huge amount of crossover between the two. And I think it makes sense to keep them in the same subgroup, but that's just my personal view. Martin, please feel free to agree or say something entirely different. Up to you. Over to you.
I'm not going to say anything entirely different, Chair, thanks, because I agree with yours and Susie's earlier sentiments, really. I can see, they seem to have asked us to treat them differently. We treat them the same. So if you look at the working with nature, even though it's described as working with nature, it really does strongly pick up on, we've morphed into dealing with the climate and nature emergencies together. So I'm not concerned about that. I've had a look at the paper, but I'm pretty confident that we're doing what we can with the resources we can to link and integrate those two. So I wouldn't challenge that. The things that and thanks, Susie, for the paper, talking us through the paper, the things that I spotted in there were, and we probably shouldn't neglect them really, because they're useful added value comments from the Commissioner's office there. But there's a reference in there quite early on in the document to linking the objectives better, and I think we can always do better there, because each of us will, from if we're an objective lead, can see the routes in and connections into the other objectives, but we don't really make the best value of them. And I wonder whether we could spend an hour as objective leads perhaps brainstorming some of those linkages and capturing them a bit better, so that we can make sure that we're doing the joining up at the level here that perhaps is there at the working level. So I'd be up for an hour on that if the others are, because I think it's kind of overdue in that sense. There's a reference. There are some references in there to making more of the Welsh or Iaith Cymraeg, the Welsh language. I need to read those a bit better to see what they are. There's also a little kind of enduring challenge there about evidencing where the wellbeing assessment has now led us to the 4 objectives we've got. So I don't know whether that needs a response, Susie, or I'm asking us all here. Perhaps it doesn't, but we could just note that really in maybe in our work I think we've evidenced it, but it's clearly not evidenced well enough for the Commissioner's Office to show the linkages there. And I think, maybe if I was responding to the Commissioner's Office, I'd probably go back and say, we haven't forgotten about it. It's still there. We're not using it and dropping it. We will take that assessment evidence forward with us in everything we'll do, and we keep checking and refreshing our work against it. I think the co-location, I'll say no, NRW is looking to rationalise some of our offices local to Swansea and to Neath Talbot. So if anybody, I might have pick up a conversation with you. We're looking to co-locate. So, I'll come back to you separately outside the meeting on that. And in fact, we'll come on to the work stream, the topic highlight reports earlier on, but we do mention in our highlight report on working with nature that we think that more integration across the objectives is needed. So I'll just kind of finish on that really, because we hadn't flagged it, so it's interesting that the Commission is flagging it too. And just to remind us, well, not remind us, you'll have got a letter from NRW probably 2 weeks ago, perhaps 2.5, 3 weeks ago now, about inviting the PSB to submit the draft wellbeing plan because NRW has got a statutory duty to sign these things off at different stages. So I know that sounds a bit surreal, but I just wanted to say that here because I'm looking for a kind of no surprises basis there. I don't want us to be critical of our draft wellbeing plan when I've worked with everybody on it so far, but I'd like to show that we've joined things up a little more, around this integration piece. That's all. So yeah, but other than that, thanks, and it's useful to see those comments coming through from the Commissioner's Office.
Thank you, Martin. I'll bring Susie in, but I'll bring Keith in first. Keith?
Yep, thanks, Chair. So many of my comments are similar to Martin's, but first of all, I took it as a very positive response from the Future Generations Commissioner's Office. There's a lot of celebrating the positive things that are in the draft plan and the way we've gone about it. I think the challenges to us are not challenges that we're unfamiliar with, which are about being more clear about how the wellbeing assessment has led us to nominate the objectives that we've got. And I take it as, well, we need to make the case or make the rationale more explicit. That's fine. And then the other element is the element that Martin has highlighted is, well, there is a challenge again to us to demonstrate how we're going to integrate the work across all the areas that we're required to address. And we know that, and we are working on that. And I think pick up Martin's point. Let's get working on that now, and not wait till we've undergone the consultation and then come to it. Then we can get into thinking about it and come up with some ideas and incorporate elements which come into the consultation as that runs on. And part of the issue we always have run up against is the compressed timescales to deliver what is actually a massive piece of work. So if we can get into working on developing the final plan in parallel with the consultation and picking up these comments, I would welcome that. It gives us the time and space to think about things without having that pressure of there's a deadline and it's next week, which we've become familiar with. So a lot to celebrate. I think some clear steers there which we need to consider, but we can address. And the key one is about integrating, making sure that we're not siloing actions. We're having a consistency of actions across all the work streams and the work of partners, aligning the work of partners with the PSB. And let's get the conversations going about how we're going to do that now. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. I'd support both your comments on that. Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to pick up on Martin's comment about co-location, and we've over many years provided sites in and around Swansea, Neath Talbot, and other parts of our areas as well for particularly Welsh Ambulance co-located a lot of our stations, which brings in the added benefit of being able of crews to be able to train together and to certainly assist as we certainly move into that emergency medical response arena as well to assist Welsh Ambulance with the pressures they're under. So that's been a really productive piece of work. We've also got a site with NRW, I think in Swansea West, I believe, Martin. Yep. And Brecon Mountain Rescue. We've got the interestingly described P&T stops for police in various locations where they're able to just to touch base and use our facilities, welfare facilities, but also secure rooms as well. So pretty well versed in that. And we're also Midrian Harris, you remember Martin through your for our strategic arson reduction board days. He's picked up a lot of linkage in with NRW to see how we can work together going forward. So which is really productive. And as a result of that, then we'll be using some of the NRW advice and guidance in and around making our locations more sustainable and how we can work together to forward that piece of work as well. So it's one of the, and you'll remember, Chair, some of the questions we had in scrutiny panel has been around the added value of PSBs and how we can demonstrate and evidence that. And I think there are some real life examples there of these things. I'm not saying they would never have happened because some were in train pre-PSB, but I think we certainly accelerated that piece of work. So I think that's something we can evidence within our future scrutiny work as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. And yeah, absolutely concur with that. And the council are also looking at a community hub-based model. And I'm sure that will include integrating a shared workspace with our partners as well. But we were thinking of calling them hubs. The P&T sounds quite appealing, but maybe we won't go there. But thank you for that. So I'm going to hand back over to Susie now.
Absolutely. Thank you all for those comments. Absolutely. What we've done is to break down the letter. I've just gone through some of the highlights, the more challenging areas, if you like, today with you. And what we've done is to identify each issue, then look at the appropriate part of the text. And we've also then identified or have started to identify specific actions, a lot of which you've mentioned there, and we'll also obviously make sure that those actions are added in if they're not already there. And I believe the planning group are going to be looking at that to expand on it over the next week, and we're meeting specifically to look at implementing and taking forward the plan as suggested. So we'll certainly set up a date as well for objective leads to come together and look at how we can act on those with yourselves as well to get that document pulled together in tandem rather than after the consultation.
Thank you, Susie. That's really helpful. I can't see anyone else indicating. We've got an agreed way forward, which is suggested, so very helpful. Thank you very much for that. So that takes us on then to item 7, which is the Swansea Public Service Board Joint Committee's ways of working. And this is open to discussion. Sorry, who is leading on this item? I think it's all of us. So, okay, so obviously we've got our current structure and the way that we work. I guess the item is here today to discuss amongst ourselves if there's any way of improving that way of working, or are we all content with the way that we currently, in regularity of meetings? Obviously, Keith has already suggested that we get together sooner in terms of, how we align ourselves with the objectives. And I think that's a really positive suggestion. But is there anything else that's missing or could be improved? Roger?
Yeah, it was just, and this has come up. I sit on Neath Talbot PSB and Swansea, and I know a number of us are involved in a number of PSBs in different areas and guises, or are certainly informed about other work as well. And probably take us all back a few years where they were very similar work streams, and rightly so, I guess. Similar work streams developed across a number of PSBs, and when you are a relatively small organisation as Fire and Rescue Service is, and we sit across 6. It is quite difficult to resource those. It's quite difficult then also to sit in individual meetings with very similar agendas being developed on a sort of a relatively small boundary around local authorities. And this isn't to open up the debate about merging. I know a number of PSBs have merged. I think there was a conversation around that some years ago and never really got anywhere. There was appetite, I think, in Swansea or Neath Talbot originally, and not in Swansea, and then it sort of reversed or whatever. So it's not about replaying those discussions. And there is I wouldn't say a danger, but there's a once PSBs merge, there's no facility to unmerge, and the people would say that there's some issues around sovereignty and that, and I get the debates and discussions around that. But certainly leading on the stronger communities piece within Swansea, there may be opportunity, I think, and certainly when I look across underneath the Talbot's plan, there's just a direct correlation there, and a lot of people are doing sort of really good work in isolation in silo, and I think it's one of the items was picked up on the strategic the audit Wales work did on the amount of strategic partnerships in Wales and the work that's going on. There's a lot of crossover, a lot of duplication, and perhaps not enough sharing of best practice as well. So it was just to see, are there opportunities where we can not merge, but certainly look at working closer together as a collective. So it was something perhaps that for the group and to have a think about, and I'm happy to raise that in Neath Talbot as well. Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. And personally, and it is my personal view, I think it's worth re-establishing those conversations and discussions in terms of merger, because there is a lot of similarity across our region, and it does make sense. And I do empathise with organisations like yourself that are dealing with a high number of PSBs, and it's an industry in itself, I'm sure, trying to just attend those. So, I personally think it's worth, we've got a new chief exec, well, relatively new chief executive in Neath Talbot. We've got new leadership. So it might be worth opening up those discussions again. I repeat, there's definitely an appetite in Swansea to consider that merger and work closely together with our partners who are just not that far over the border. So happy if you want to mention it in Neath Talbot as well. So I've got Martin next, and then Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And when you open this item up, Chair, it just jogged my memory as to why we've got ways of working on our agenda, and it's because when we agreed on the wellbeing objectives, we did feel that there was a certain amount of rolling over of it, but that's fairly routine in the sense it was informed by wellbeing assessment. But we did say at the time the key to us delivering here is the ways in which we work. That's the real added value. We can work with whichever objectives we've got. The challenge is to join them up and do things in different ways that haven't been done before. And that's why I find the Wellbeing Act so enduringly challenging, because it really does invite you to think and act differently. And I struggle with it all the time. But I think that's partly why the letter from the Commissioner's office was peppered a bit with that around co-location and sharing resources, pooling resources. They mentioned secondments. And I know in straitened times, a lot of these things are quite, even more challenging. But that's where that comes in there, I think. So I do think there are some opportunities there. I was looking, as an example, in this week, I was talking to Steve Wilson in Dŵr Cymru, and I think he's been, with us as a PSB before. Sewage treatment works down in Trebanos. That when you look at what the issues there are around public perception, discharge into water, what goes into the system there, through paints and spills and oils and everything, and misconnections through housing, the educational aspects of that, that's all, the solutions to that are joined up and require a very, very joined up approach. So there'll be numerous examples of all that, but I think that's what this ways of working stuff is about, is finding space and time to think and work in those different ways. And there are examples of it, but I just feel as if I don't do half enough on it myself.
Thank you, Martin. Keith?
Yep, thanks. I'm sorry, I've got a cat on my lap who very resistant to moving. Apologies for that. First, and apologies also that, in terms of ways of working, I think a good start is for partners to turn up. And I'm very mindful that from the Health Board, I'm the only rep who's turned up today. So that needs to be a first step, doesn't it? Where is the engagement and commitment of partners? I'm not questioning anyone else's engagement and commitment. I'm just reflecting on why is it that that I'm the only one here today. I'd welcome the opportunity to look at, even if not integration, better alignment across the Swansea and Neathport Talbot footprints, because I think there are many common issues. There are distinctive issues as well, but there are many common issues, and the population does flow across the administrative boundaries in terms of going to and from employment and education and leisure and the like. So there is some common interest there. If that leads to formal integration, then so be it. But I think alignment is a good place to start. I think the concern that I have was around how do we capitalize on the good relationships and a lot of positive discussion that goes on between those involved in operational delivery, and translate that into or develop that into transformational approaches. So folks who do things generally have very good relationships across the region, across all the different organizations, because they are in established relationships, they're working well, and they're focused on common outcomes. And the question is, how do we capitalize and build on that and expand that up to scale? So that is partly what I think what the Future Generations Commissioner's Office is getting at, in terms of, well, how do we regularize that interaction and integration agenda to deliver as a partnership which we're not capable of delivering as a series of individual partners, because that's a fundamental purpose of the PSB. So, and that for me then, unfortunately, I think means more conversations. You can call them meetings if you like, but it means more regular engagement, conversations, discussion, whether formal or informal, leading to understanding of the situations, identification of risks and mitigating actions and putting them in place. So it's how do we, I think the ways of working for me is how do we move from a plan to action on the ground, which is genuinely transformational. And to do that, we need to be having more. That's not something which Susie will come up with, even with the benefits of some ongoing conversations during the consultation. That's something which the people charged with doing the work need to get involved with, and that involves people actually doing the work. So turning up to meetings, having the conversations, and changing the way we do things as a result. So that, for me, that's what ways of working is about. Getting people together perhaps more frequently than we do at the moment, but focused on what is the objective here? What are our plans? How are we going to deliver that? Okay, how are we doing? What do we need to change, and doing that in an iterative way?
Yes, thank you, Keith. That's really helpful. Ness? Sorry, Ness, you're on mute.
I've been on mute all day to stop people hearing me coughing. So just to say, obviously, I can't comment on sort of the ways of working in the past, being new to this group, but absolutely hearing what Keith and Martin say about the value of meeting more frequently, but meeting to discuss specific issues that we can collectively work on together. And so we've got the plan, and that's great. The more practical those issues are, the more engaged people are about how do we solve that particular problem. So for me, it's identifying what are those top issues, and whether it's, for example, the sewage point that Martin was making, but are there other things where we can really add value by coming together and we all have a contribution to solving a particular problem. So for me, it's about identifying within the wellbeing plan those specific things, and then building our relationships around those. And as we're successful in tackling specific problems, we will get better at that working together around the rest of the plan as well.
Thanks, Ness. Roger, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Chair. The next Neath Talbot PSB meeting is next Tuesday, so if you're happy, I can raise it there as a starting point. I'll certainly make a couple of phone calls prior to that just to make sure that people don't feel as if they're blindsided or whatever. So I think people like just have an opportunity to reflect and have a think about it, because it has certainly been debated in the past and hasn't really moved anywhere. But I think there's some advantage. We've done some good work, particularly around the drugs deaths and county lines, and there's been, but those are very much reactive work to what's already happening. So I think the longer term agenda would certainly benefit from working together. And yeah, but if you're happy, I'll raise that next Tuesday, unless you wanted to do that direct across to the leader in Neath Talbot prior to that. I'm happy to take your lead, Chair.
Yeah, I think if we deal with the political element of it, and then if you want to deal with other partners across the bridge, as it were, then that would be great. Happy to pick that up. And picking up on the point that Keith has made, which is, if I understand correctly, it's about meetings outside of these meetings, which are less formal discussions and are more, in a sense, brainstorming sessions about finding those common areas where we can actually contribute as partners and not work in silos with individual areas of interest. Keith, would that be something that would be of interest, something offline to begin with?
Yeah, I think it is about that informal, that sitting around with a cup of tea and chewing the fat kind of conversation about how that, but with a purpose, not just idle, focused on the emergent objectives and trying to fill in the plans behind that. And then that creates the relationships and the common understanding for the delivery element later on. So it's getting into that kind of stage. There's nothing magical about it. It's how partnerships form, isn't it? You have a common commitment. You get into a relationship with others about delivering that commitment. You agree what you're going to do and who's going to do it, and you get on and do it. And then the accountability and the governance sits through the existing mechanisms. But it's getting people into thinking that the PSB is actually about doing something, not just about talking about doing something.
Yeah, I must admit, I am really encouraged by that. What I would suggest is perhaps, and I don't think it's beyond our wit to pull something together, which is an informal get together to discuss the objectives and everything you've said, but that it would be in person only, as opposed to online, because I think that's the important part, is getting together face to face over a cup of coffee, cup of tea. And I'm sure that, I'm looking at Ness, but I'm sure we can help facilitate that. Ness is nodding. So yeah, that's something that's really positive and welcomed and should be really useful to us as a PSB. And if discussions go well next week, we may even get together as an integrated or joint aligned PSB with our neighbours as well. So we look forward to that. Okay, great. Anything else on this item? No, I think we've had a really positive discussion there and moved things forward very well. So we'll move on then to item 8, which is engagement and consultation. Again, this is a discussion. I know this is something which is which Susie is very keen on as well. So I don't know if anybody wants to come in on this, or Susie, do you want to say a few words on this item before we open up for discussion? Sorry, you're on mute, Susie.
I guess what would be useful would be thinking ahead to the publication of the plan, what mechanisms you'd like to put in place, or what versions we need to think about funding now, because that's something which we need to be working towards right now. I know that Neath Talbot, for example, are looking at potentially spending about £3,000 of our regional grant with iCreate, looking at a way to put the plan into an accessible online format. So I'm sort of conscious that that's a piece of work which is going ahead. And whether we choose to do something similar or do something much more maybe low key, and we put that investment into action planning around the groups or easy reads or youth versions, or however you see fit, or that panning out.
Thank you, Susie. Ness?
Yeah, I mean, Susie's basically kind of said, I think the key point, immediate point around consultation engagement is around the plan itself. But thinking about, ensuring accessibility, and so whatever format we go with, just ensuring that it does address, the needs of different individuals who may be wanting to access it, and just thinking if we can be a bit more creative than it just being a written document. And certainly in previous roles and previous PSBs that I've worked on, using videos can be quite effective, and just easy reads to ensure that you're kind of capturing the key exciting elements of our plan without everybody having to read through the whole thing. So that would be my preference. It doesn't need to necessarily be that expensive, but looking also at how that might be funded. If there are costs involved, do we have a budget for that, Susie?
There's regional funds which can't be used for delivery, which are for the PSB, which this year are going to be used for the development of the plan. Some of that is already allocated, things like translation. We've got some accessible engagement work going on with West Glamorgan. And I know that Neath Talbot are looking at iCreate as a mechanism for the final version of the plan. So it was just to identify any formats which partners need us to take account of as well, because I know that sometimes partners have different requirements for publication at the end as well, so that we can tie all that in together and look at what budget we might have.
So I guess in that sense, I just want, whatever we do, we need to make sure that it's gone through that process of understanding the accessibility requirements, and so it meets those. Thanks.
Thank you both. So that has come across very clearly. So I'm going to open up to partners. I think it's really important that the plan is accessible to all. Obviously, that will come with, albeit a small cost. So, Susie, if I hear you correctly, we've used our budget in terms of Welsh translation, etc. So this would be an additional ask of partners and ourselves?
No, it should be that we should have some more. We should have some budget available. It's a joint budget with Neath Talbot, so that's it's for collaborative work on the wellbeing plan around the consultation engagement and publication of the plan. So we would have a small budget to look at options like video, for example, or online, or whatever. I know last time I think it was Braille I think Health were keen on at the time. If there's any requirements like that, it would be useful to know now, so that we can, while we have access to potential funds, we're able to do that.
Okay, thank you, Susie. So there is funding available. So it's really the views of this board to decide which direction we want to go in terms of making sure this is accessible. I personally think we have to have a presence online. That's where most people are these days. And so having an online version is a given, I would have thought. But in terms of, other things to consider in terms of accessibility of the plan, does anyone have any additional views? Video's been mentioned, Braille has been mentioned. I don't know, Keith, from the Health Board's perspective, do you have any views on this?
There's not an organisational position, or not one that I'm aware of. It's interesting that Braille has been mentioned, because I would have thought that an audio account of or now technology allows websites to be read out, that the Braille is probably less important. I'm not saying it's not important, but folks are less reliant on Braille. Can certainly take advice and feed that in.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. That's a very good point. So if anyone has no objections, we would support an online version. Is everybody happy with that? And that would include video with audio. So hopefully we will cover off all bases and subtitles, of course, for people with hearing difficulties. So yeah, are we all okay with that? I could see a lot of people agreeing with that. Okay, thank you for that. So that closes that item for now, but obviously engagement and consultation is something which is ongoing for us as a PSB. I'm always conscious of the fact that we rarely have members of the public present, and hardly ever. I can't remember the last time we had a question from a member of the public. So I think, engagement and consultation is something that we need to really consider going forward in terms of our meetings, and trying to promote them as far and wide as we possibly can, and try and engage people to interact with the PSB. Always an ongoing challenge. So that takes us on then to the reports which are for information only. And by exception, unless anybody's got anything to raise on those, I will move on. I can't see anybody indicating. We'll move on to the date of our next meeting, which is Thursday, the 9th of February at 3 p.m. But given the discussions today, I am sure I will meet all of you face to face very soon, and look forward to doing so, because it's always good to meet in person. Online meetings have a place, of course, but it can't beat being face to face. So I look forward to the informal meeting that will be arranged. And it just remains for me to thank you all for your contributions today, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you all. Roger?
Yeah, I thought I'd just come in a big plug for our annual business improvement plan. Our consultation finishes on Tuesday. I know we've sent it around PSB partners, but if I could really encourage you to, it won't take long, and you could win a prize. So
thank you, Roger. Shameless plug, but we'll allow it.
But we've sent around our draft corporate plan as well, and we didn't offer a prize, Roger.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of points. The first is just a reminder to partners with regard to the Swansea Charter on climate change. If you haven't yet signed up, Susie, how do colleagues go about doing that?
Jane Richmond's will be in touch via the operational leads.
Thank you. And the second one is just to, if I'm sure colleagues are aware, but we have our declaration event for Swansea as a human rights city taking place on the 12th of December in the Swansea.com Stadium. Is that the name of it now? I think that's on the 12th in the morning. So hopefully you've had your invitation, and we'd love to see you there. So I just wanted to remind you of that. And aligned to that, we are, one of the things that the leader will be raising in that session is a desire for us to extend our engagement with a wider group of representatives in terms of those with protected characteristics and faith groups, to ensure that the work that we're doing on Human Rights City is actually really relevant and appropriate to address the needs and concerns of those groups. So just to let you know that that's a piece of work that will be going on over the next few months, and we'll keep you updated as we do that, as obviously PSB partners are a really key part of our steering group work around the Human Rights City. So thank you.
Thank you, Ness, and thank you all for the plugs. No issue with those at all. And you know, this is probably one of the best platforms to do that. So thank you all very much for attending again. And you have a half an hour of your lives back, which I'm sure you'll put to good use. And I shall see you very soon. Thank you all very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yeah. See you all.
Thanks, Andrea.